Okay. Hello, everybody. I apologise for being slightly late. I had I think it's a common story today, a few technical issues. We'll be running off a hotspot with 4G today, but hopefully we will make it through. So a little bit about the DDD conference. We do have a code of conduct, so please do be kind to others and obviously treat people how you would like to be treated, and we're all going to get on fine. If you would like to donate, our donation target of choice is the National Museum of Computing, which is a fantastic thing to be looking at. And if you haven't been to visit, I highly recommend that you do. Still haven't found a reason to, well, haven't been able to justify dragging my young children along yet, but they will go at some point. And again, obviously this would not be possible without sponsors. So we're very fortunate in having some wonderful sponsors to let us keep doing this. And we are trying to make it as sociable as possible. So there's Twitter, and obviously there's Discord. To tweet and ask questions. We're more than willing to. Okay, so on to the topic of today. I'd like to share with you two of my passions, which are gaming and Xamarin, and then what happened when a project allowed me to combine the two of those together. Quickly, before we dig into the actual detail, I'll give a little brief overview about myself. I'm a software engineer, have been for 1.5 decades now, primarily started in WPF, and then I've migrated across to mobile development, which has started when they have given the WPF experience. Xamarin seemed like a sensible choice, and I've been there for a good few years now. Now, the primary work that I do is on functional business applications, so they don't tend to be the prettiest or fanciest, but they get the job done. That's not then necessarily allowed me to unleash my creative side. That is until this project came along. Between us, myself and a friend, we built a Wordsearch application built within Xamarin Forms. One of the we like to keep bragging about, I guess, is the fact that we've actually proven that side projects do actually get completed. Now, the ratio to starting and finishing is, I would probably best not go there, but like I say, we did manage to finish one. As I mentioned, this is built primarily. This is built with Xamarin Forms. It's got a JavaScript backend, but other than that, what you see is here is everything that can be achieved within Xamarin Forms. Because of the vast availability of frameworks and functionality that we could achieve, we were able to do this, build this from a prototype that we built in February through to getting it live in a store within 5 months. And I think that helps explain the value or back up the value that we get from the community. And we're gonna dig through some of that in a bit. But it's really allowed to limit the amount of code that we write to actually focus on the core values of what we needed to achieve. And I know with the Xamarin side of things, people like to point out the amount of shared code that can be achieved. And I was pleasantly surprised when we did some calculations to work out that we hit 98% of shared code. So there's very little in terms of Android and iOS specific coding. And this would have been impossible without the community. The timescales and everything is not a reflection on the effort or our skills as developers, but all of the value that you get from Xamarin, the community built around Xamarin. Now, today we're going to cover some of the concepts that made the game, I think, really feel alive, but because it's never much fun digging into someone else's code base, I've built a demo application that is largely inspired by a memory matching game that my daughters used to play. And the plan is we're going to take something that's functional, as I mentioned before, that's what I'm good at, and then we're going to turn that into something that feels much more alive and gives the user the feel of some actual positive feedback. So we are going to go and take a look at our demo application quickly, and then we'll jump into the actual some of the technical detail. So this is an app that's built, we've designed it with MVVM, for those that are familiar. It's a simple bit of XAML that will render. We've got play button, and we've got some tiles where you can match, and then you can see how terrible my memory is here. Get a little score counter, and then eventually we're told we've done well. Now, it works. It doesn't look too bad, but I think we can start to make that look a little bit more impressive. So, animation is going to take a large part of this talk today, and they're split into two main parts. The first part being Lottie. For those of you that are not familiar with Lottie, it's a library built on open source by Airbnb that allows you to show some fancy little animations when you're booking your place to stay, and it's grown into something that's quite widely used within the community. It's not strictly just Xamarin based, but there are NuGet packages that supply the functionality for us. The key principle for Lottie is it lets you generate your animations within After Effects, a piece of software built by Adobe, and then through the use of a plugin called Body Moving, it lets you export them out to a JSON file. I guess the key point on the fact that it's impressively small, if you start to compare being able to achieve an animation like this with an alternative, the animated GIF or a video file, in fact, it's vastly smaller. I think one of the animations we're looking at today is maybe about 50 kilobytes. And then on top of it being small, it then natively renders it, so it's actually scalable. So it removes the need of having to have multiple sizes of images to fit different device sizes. It will render it cleanly and sharply at whatever size you draw it or you tell it to render at. And for some of us who are maybe not necessarily as creative as we would like to be, I know I certainly have a good picture in my head of what I want, but when I try to put it down on paper or anything that provides the proof of what I'm thinking, it never turns out the way that I like. So there are some amazing resources, and the one key resource that I'd like to show you today is Lottie. So on here, what we can see is this is a site where people supply their own animations pre-built. There's a set of free ones, and then there's also paid for ones if you don't find what you're looking for. So the plan is we're going to add a dynamic background to our app to make it give it a feel like it's still there, still alive while we're working. And for that, I've chosen this, and we're going to then embed it into our application. A quick point. I'm not necessarily the greatest with colors, but you can see that it doesn't necessarily strictly match our color scheme. So while you gain the ability of someone providing you a pre-built animation, there's also some fancy tooling within Lottie itself. So edit layer colors button that actually lets you tweak the colors of each of these, and depending on how well it's structured with the animator, you can tweak all the different parts. So you can just change it. not trying to match the color scheme because I've already done this. And then you start to see that you get the color updates. This is I think one of the more impressive parts of what I've discovered on this journey of building the app. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, there is a NuGet package for there's Android, iOS, as in Xamarin Android, Xamarin iOS, and then also Xamarin Forms that can be used. So we're now going to jump over to our code and we're going to apply it. So typically you'd add the NuGet package. We're not going to go through all of these steps, partially because I'm running on 4G, so it'll be slower and it just takes a little bit of time. So there's a NuGet package here, which I'm going to sign at the end of this talk. Once you add that, it will simply add it. There's no initializing for this library. So add in our little view that I've impressive levels of detail about being able to click certain parts of the animation and react to those differently. But for a simple overview for now, we're going to point it at an animation. This is the JSON file. You should see here is in our iOS and our Android, we both have them. They have different build actions, so it's an asset for Android and a bundle for iOS. So that just tells it how to load it, where to find it. I believe there is a way to embed it within the shared project. I've not done that here. We're going to make it repeat infinitely, so it's constantly on a loop in the background. Visual Studio is pretty good these days, but there is the namespace that you need to add if it doesn't. I've also, just to give a little bit of information when we once we've guessed all 4 pairs. Just to do that, we need to trigger it from code behind. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be a way to trigger it from a binding, which would be the MVVM MAUI approach to doing it. Let's build this and run it up. I don't know if I can show you. Oh, that's building. While that's building, we can go off. And start to look at what's available. Which one's going to win? No. So there's all fancy animations that they show what can be achieved. You see actually the vast amount of options that they do provide. You can change the speed as well. So technically, if you had you want to put some pressure on the user, you could up the speeds to make them feel like things are speeding up and it becomes more intense. And then there's vast amounts of being able to you can click on different parts to be able to react to it. So I guess the theory you could possibly build a game into just an animation. So here we see that now we've got our little dots animating. Gives it a feeling of things are still alive. And then we've got a little animation to say that we've achieved what we've set out to do, which is great. Okay. That covers the topic for Lottie. Our next stop on the animation tour is going to be the animation class within Xamarin itself, or Xamarin Forms itself. I think this is a class that's, I think, been designed really quite well. It gives you the ability to create quite powerful animations, and yet the API is still quite simple. That's obviously quite a difficult thing to get right. So with Xamarin Forms, they provide a small set of pre-built animations, so you can animate the scale, the location, and the rotation of things with just a simple helper method. But then that ultimately under the hood uses the animation class, and it lets you define more quite complex animations to be able to manipulate the most different properties within a Xamarin Forms control. So as you can see, these are two that have been built that are slightly more challenging, but again, actually, when we look at the code, it's actually not that complicated. These, as part of the work that we've done in building the Wordsearch app, we've discovered that we've consumed a lot of value from other toolkits and frameworks. So as part of consuming that, we've committed to giving back some value. So these two animations have actually now shipped with the Xamarin Community called Toolkit version 1.3, and there is a hope that the set of animations will be able to grow in terms of giving a much wider set of animations that people can render within their apps. Originally, we've based it on this site here, which animates.style, which is fantastic if you like to browse different types. So you can see here, these are CSS animations. And the hope is that we can translate the majority of these across to something that could be used within the toolkit. I think there's roughly 92, 94 animations here. So there's a fair bit of work, but it is just a case of translating it, which and that said, then that opportunity to be able to contribute something to OSS open source if anyone's out there wanting to do that. So we shall now jump back over to our code base, and we're gonna apply two different animations now. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how some of this is driven, but just enough to give you the concept of what we're going to start changing now. So the shapes that you see, the tiles, they're in what's known as a bindable layout. So it's just something that says, well, here's 10 things, and it can render them accordingly based on some rules. So because we're going with a flex layout, we can tell it where to position them within the rows or columns. And how it wraps. Then on top of what we're to our tile. So behavior is, as it suggests, you can attach something that will then invoke a specific bit on the redefine. And in our behavior class over here, so like I say, we've got some key parts where when we attach to it, we need to hook up and then we can respond to certain events or property changes. That's all of this kind of boilerplate code. Hopefully that shouldn't be too unfamiliar, but I'm more than happy to answer questions on any of this topic, either online or offline. So please, if there's anything that's not clear, I'm willing to discuss that. So as I say, we've hooked up to different event changes, and ultimately the bit that we care about is a bit more context, maybe better. So we have, for each tile you see, we have a view model that represents it. It knows its shape, and then we've got whether it's been guessed and whether it's selected. So selected, it's turned over. guessed is, as you've guessed it, person's got a parent is correct. So for the first example of our pre-built animations, we could do it based on whether something's selected, because they already offer the ability to rotate things. So what we do is we're always going to rotate irrespective of whether we are selected or not, because if you're unselected, then you want to reset it back. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it around the x-axis by 90 degrees. So it's actually going to look like it's practically invisible, because we're going to give the notion of it turn like you're flipping a coin effectively. So we flip it 90 degrees, then we're going to make the content either visible or invisible based on the action that the user taken, and then we're going to rotate it the final 90 degrees. That then gives us the impression that it's turning over, and then it gives you the impression that it's three-dimensional, because you see the content appear or disappear part way through the animation. We get to choose how quickly to do it, and now that this is quite an important topic within animations themselves, is that you always want to show the user something happening, but you don't ever want to block them from being able to do what they want to do. So fine-tuning how long you animate for can be quite challenging or fun at the same time, depending on, I guess, which way inclined you are. But then there's also the concept of maybe cancelling it if the user taps. So they get the impression that they get the feedback if they want it, but through it if they don't want to. So it's always very important not to block people, because it can quite easily upset them. And then I thoroughly recommend starting to play around with the easings when you actually start to doing animations, because they do make quite subtle differences, but they do provide quite a finishing touch. Okay, so we will do the rotation quickly, and then we'll jump on into the more complex part. And here we go. So we've got an animation. That's good, but I think what we're going to do next is we're going to give them a bit more feedback once they've actually guessed something. So that's going to be in the form of a more complex one, because we're going to want to, we could do it with some of the pre-built ones, because you can do it with a you can translate to, not translate, sorry, scale to. So you could effectively change this and have multiple awaits in there. But sometimes if you're dealing with multiple frames, it can be quite nice to be able to just see it here. So to come with the preference, so if you do it that way, then it might become a little bit easier to read as well, because then it all lines up nicely. So to start off, we're going to create an animation class. Now, an animation itself is a collection of other animations. So what you end up doing is you create a parent animation, and then you attach the frames to it. So what we're going to say is between 0 and 20% of our time, we're going to change the scale of our frame from 1 down to 0.9. Then from 20 to 75%, we're going to go from 0.9 up to 1.2% of the 120% of the time size. So these are all percentages effectively. And then finally, we're going to rest that back down to 0. So what we're going to do is the tile is going to shrink, grow, and then go straight down to 0 to give you a little bit of feedback to show that you've had a success. And then finally, once we've built our animation, then we have to commit it in order to run it. What that will do is it will you tell it what the owner is and a name. So if you ever want to cancel it, as I mentioned before, you could cancel it. Tell it how long to do it for. Again, the easing that makes a slight difference in how quickly it speeds up or slows down. And then you get a callback to say it's finished, and therefore we're just going to make sure that the tile's then invisible once we're done. There we go. Gives a little bit of reinforcement that we've done something. Okay. I apologize. We're going to jump back on into another topic. I'm trying to rush through this because there's quite a bit to cover in this time frame, but hopefully we'll get there. So the final main topic in terms of visual effects that we're going to add is a particle effect. So I think that's going to actually give the finishing touch to the confirmation that you've guessed something. This is what we managed to put within the Wordsearch app. So you can see that we're on a successful guess. We're triggering off a set of stars that will then animate out. We're going to do this through, again, there's functionality provided by Xamarin Forms that lets you define something, and then you can override it at platform-specific layers. And this is where the majority of our platform-specific code actually lies within our app. This I can't take full credit, well, can't take much credit for this actually, is the fact that inspiration was driven by a community blog post by another engineer, Randy, who's, if you follow Xamarin, then I'm sure you've heard of him. Where he takes us through being able to render an effect, but we've then taken that and we've tried to apply it to this scenario. So, sorry, we're going to jump back into code and we'll show you how to achieve this. So a very brief overview of effects themselves. So what we do is in our shared code base, we will generate, we'll build a class to say what will represent the particle effect, and therefore we can then define properties within our XAML. So how many particles we want, how long they're going to live for, how quickly they're going to move, the size, and then the image that we want to render. And there's just a few bits of being able to raise an event that will then be handled in the platform-specific code. So if we jump on over to here, what we'll see is there's one here, and then there's also one in the Android layout. I'm starting to grow more towards actually naming this differently, because you end up getting into a bit of confusion when you start to deal with namings of things. So I think a common one now is you either put iOS, but that seems a little painful because it never seems to suit any .NET naming rules, or people stick platform in the front. This again works similarly to how the behavior works, is you attach to it when it's rendered and you detach from it. So again, you hook up to any events or any behavior changes you want, and obviously make sure to behave and unhook from those event handlers when you're detaching, so we're not going to risk any memory leaks. And then what we're going to do is in our platform specific in our shell it and then tell the platform specific code to then start emitting. This is how we handle that. So the element that we do is we've rendered within our XAML. So in our scenario, that is going to be the grid. So you can see there we've defined it in the XAML. We will grab that and then we can rip out all of the properties that we care about. It's a slight bit of the platform specific layers actually behave differently. So it's all about, I guess you've got to try and find a sensible common set of values that you can, and then you just have to translate them across. So speed in terms of Android requires no multipliers, so that's where we settle that, and then you have to up it for the Xamarin, the iOS side. For iOS, there's not too much to it. We have to define what's going to do the emitting, and then what it's going to emit. So there's a CA, which is the core animation. That's deep down in the Apple framework. Now, there you tell it where it is and what type of shape you're going to be emitting, and then eventually we tell it what cell we're going to emit. Now this can be anything, and actually you can give it multiple. So you can actually have, you could emit stars, squares. We could emit all of the shapes that we have from our tiles. That may have actually been a better use of this. So define our XAML, so we can define how quickly they move, the size of them, the range. That'll just means that they'll emit in a 360-degree radius. And then, so when you start emitting, the way to stop it is you have to tell it, well, stop giving birth to the cells. So once you set the birth rate to 0, then it will stop spawning new cells. So all we do is we trigger it for a short period of time, 100 milliseconds. This is true Android. So on the tile state behavior, this line, when our tile has been guessed, what we're going to say is, and we've finished our animation as we did before. So we've animated the grow and shrink, grow, shrink in size. Then we shall, on the finished, so after the 500 milliseconds has elapsed, we will then say, well, fire that event, which is then going to delegate down into this layer. And basically after stop emitting. We'll demonstrate Android, it does work, it's possible, and it does work. You can see here there is a particle effect. The only extra bit of work is we have to, there's someone has kindly done the work of generating Xamarin bindings for an Android layer that we need. These will all be linked in the show notes, but basically we have to do that in order to achieve it. So I've just compiled them down into a DLL and then embedded them within the Android app. And now, hopefully, you see we get a fancy little animation at the end. God, stars are shapes are too similar. Jump back to our notes. Now that I've shown you how lots of ways to be able to make the what we should have done. So I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, I think you can see how visually appealing it can be to be able to add these effects in to an app. But while there are, I mean, this is a very popular topic at the moment, accessibility. We need to be as inclusive as we can. And ultimately, things like this can actually be less inclusive because there are people that have issues with motion, and even to the point of the fact that even the OSs have introduced settings within the OS to be able to reduce that. So we should take note of these, and if we detect that their reduced motion is off, then in theory, I don't think we should be animating. Now that said, maybe that is something that might be considered being lower down in the Xamarin Forms layer eventually, in the fact that if this is on, maybe we shouldn't be animating it at all. but at the moment it's within the power of the developer to follow with that, to abide by those rules. And then there's many other things to consider. So whether your contrast is high enough. Actually, I'm not sure the app that we've got really would have been. So maybe we'd have to try and tweak some of our sizing. Sorry, our colours. Make sure we've got a better contrast ratio. And then again, the specific fonts that can help improve readability. So there's a font that help with maybe dyslexia. There's a Alexia font that can help. So there's lots of areas that we can consider to try and actually, while we're making it look and feel how it works for us, is then we then maybe need to widen the scope of who we're trying to appeal for and make it more inclusive. I wanted to give a little shout out to a lot of the other frameworks that we used, but they're kind of, you don't really see them because they're all hidden under the hood. So one of the frameworks we used was for rendering SVGs, because obviously with mobile development, image management is never been that much fun. I think if you think about between Android and iOS, you can look at between 6 or 7 different image sizes, which can become rather painful, and especially if it's just yourself working on an app, then that level of pain can be quite difficult. There are sites out there like the Google Web Fonts, the Material.io stuff, which provides a set of images already scaled at a limited set of sizes. So if they fit with what you're doing, then that's great. But quite often you'll want to build your own. And then on that topic, there's another framework called Mobile Build Tools, built by Dan Siegel, who has tried to solve some of that image management problem. I mean, it solves a lot more in terms of being able to embed secrets in there without actually putting them in your code base, as well as configuration management and other bits like that. But the core part we used it for was some of this in image management again. Now this came after the fact that we'd started using SVGs for some flag rendering, but it lets you say you can have a single image and you can set up some config and it will then size it down to the desired size for each platform specific resolution. So you're at 1x, at 2x, at 3x for iOS, and then you've got your MDPI, HDPI, and then all of the XDPIs, and that just does it at build time. So you supply the image at whatever size you want, define how you want to scale it down, and you end up with those pre-built and embedded within your app, which is fantastic. Poly works really well to allow us to manage the connectivity. So there was 2 of us that worked on this project. My friend who lived in London, Joe, he painfully said, well, I'm going to go and test the connectivity of the app now. And when I sat on the tube, pointed out all of the pain points. So Poly allowed us to be able to handle those scenarios and perform much better. So we very rarely hit the server now. And when we do, we've got handy timeouts and connection recovery models to be able to solve that. Sharpenedo lets us render our tiles in our grids. We had a few issues with the collection view on Xamarin Forms, so that's worked really well. Some base layer stuff, and then I think the most of it's fairly straightforward. Xamarin Community Toolkit is a fantastic toolkit. If you haven't used it, we consumed much more than we expected to. It saved us a lot of pain in terms of multiple button mashing by users, and the fact that they've got a good model in there for handling asynchronous events or commands, should I say. So if a user taps a button and starts consuming all of their hints, which someone did, got it to -8, there's with one line change you can fix it with the framework that they've provided. And the rest should be fairly self-explanatory. In-app billing, playing audio, store reviews, obviously great. We will need to keep the word up that people like it, database layer, and then being able to render pop-ups with some fancy animations. The RG plugins pop-up is a very good framework too. So I guess what next in terms of the demo app that we had. So I would have considered that we should maybe consider expanding the senses. Now these are not good topics for a talk because you can't really experience these that well. So haptic feedback, we found, can have a divisive. Some people like it, some people hate it, but I think the majority actually quite like it. Being able to have that touch feedback that you've actually done something. And then audio as well, adding sounds in and effects made a big difference. Fonts, again, these made another big impact. I think that's what the screenshot should have animated in now to show you. In the fact that, yeah, the one on the left is the font we fell in love with. Tried to find an alternative, but I think this makes a big difference. But always be wary of licensing, because on sites like DeFont, while they are readily available, I think it's less than 10% of them that are actually really free to use within maybe a commercial aspect. So definitely read the fine print before you get involved with using a font. Okay, so in summary, thank you very much for attending today. It's a shame that we couldn't do it in person, but it's a sensible approach that we're doing here. And I think, as it mentioned before, in previous talks, is that it's actually allowed a much wider audience and actually a much wider set of speakers to be able to attend and present to them. I hope that my talk today will show you how you can make an app, not necessarily just a game. I know that it's titled as a game, but can let you show how an app can feel much more natural and give much better feedback to a user. And I think there are quite a wide range of possibilities that these could be used for. And I'd love to hear if anyone does have a way of, does use any of this, then I'd love to hear or see what you've been able to achieve. So there is code online. I can share these slides at some point. I'll put it in the Discord channel that will allow you to grab the code and just run it up, and it works. It's on a branch at the moment called Shapes because it previously worked off images. And at the moment there's been a little bit of work trying to migrate this across to MAUI as part of one of the Microsoft team have been looking at some of that. So it would be quite nice to follow that, certainly for my own interest. And then just finally, on top of what we've covered today, is I'm now trying to write up the entire app as a kind of a step-by-step guide and into a blog post. So at the moment, I think we're up to 4 or 5. I only really get into kind of visual elements now, but it's aimed at being able to create a brand new application, put in MVVM support, and then apply each of the different aspects, much more than we've covered today. But I would hope that it's of value, so please do check it out. Okay, and that's everything from me. So if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer any. Yeah, I don't know how things might be publicized better. I know that there are quite a few, I guess, content creators now, aren't there, which it's Gerald and a couple of other Xamarin-based people that are have got YouTube channels that are promoting bits like this. But again, it's partially down to needing to be able to know where you're looking in terms of finding this kind of stuff. I don't know if there is a nice way to be able to curate this kind of content.
Feel free to carry on the conversation in the Discord. I'm sure.
Yep. Yeah, I'll be hanging around for a little bit. Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending.